Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on preparing to complete Module 1 of the CSBG Annual Report. For those who may not know me, I'm Lauren Cook, CSBG Team Lead at NASCSP. Before then, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. All these are on mute. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask questions using chat option on the webinar toolbar, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen, where you'll see a text box where you can type a question. It will be read aloud and answered during the Q&A portions of the webinar. The webinar will have a Q&A session where you can also raise your hand and we will unmute you. It will be recorded and posted to the NASCSP website following the webinar. I want you to follow along today with a PDF version of the CSBG Annual Report, and you'll notice that we've provided page numbers in the bottom left corner of the slides today to help you stay on track as you go through the PDF. Today on Module 1 will be presented by OCS and NASCSP staff. OCS, we have Seth Hassett, the Director of the Division of Community Assistance. We also have Monique Alcantara, Management and Program Analyst. And from CASP, we have Jackie Orr, CSBG State Assistance Director, myself, Lauren Cook, Kate, Consultant, NASCSP and OCS, and Katie Kajowski, Consultant with NASCSP. Over to Seth Hassett.
And thanks to everyone who's joining us today on this webinar. We are going here just a couple of quick highlights. Wanted to highlight a few are here with us today. Several staff from the Division of Community Assistance. A name to you will be Bill Bolduc, Commander Bill Bolduc, who is the Program Operations Branch Chief, is joining us. And we have other, and we will, in the next a couple of weeks, be sharing some new staff lists. We've had quite a few changes during the last few weeks in terms of our staff, on some new people, and a couple of departures. But for today, we will, just want to introduce that there are several OCS staff here with me, and that they will also potentially, as necessary, be participating in the question and answer phase. Just to highlight, we are to be getting ready to go live with the new CSBG Online Annual Report. And you hear this later, we are expecting the actual live date for the OLDC system to be March 2nd, 2017. It is a little bit of a couple of days later than we announced in our recent submittal, and that is as we're making final adjustments based on our testing, our feedback, our work with the Information Services. It's looking like the best way to approach this is going to be to give them those couple of extra days in order to take all final technical modifications. I hope that will avoid further problems, further issues at a later stage. So this slide gives kind of a picture of where we are in the process, and we are entering a new phase in terms of the CSBG State Annual Report. As most of you may know, we received clearance from the Office of Management and Budget on January 12th, 2017, for the content of a new 4-module and report. Cleared for 3 years. The expiration date is January 31st, 2020, and we issued an information memoranda, IM 152, that provides the overall guidance on the implementation. We expect to highlight a couple of items on this. This being implemented in 2 phases. As in, there are 4 modules to the annual report, and for the first phase, which is what we're starting this year and we'll be doing next year, states completing only Module 1 of the report through online data collection system. So for both fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 17, states will be submitting Module 1, which is a state administrative module, through the OLDC system, and they will continue to collect and enter the CSBG Information Survey or CSBG IS data from local entities to enter in the CSBG IS access database for those 2 years. And for both these systems, for this fiscal year, the submission date for Module 1 in OLDC and for the items in the CSBG IS access database, the due date for submission is going to be April 7th, 2017. That's basically a week later than the traditional date, the March 31st date for submission of the annual report. It was done for a number of reasons, including the fact that this is a new report and want to make sure, again, that we give adequate time. Also, given that there is a national conference taking place the week before, we believe that we have an opportunity to make that people will provide the highest quality submissions and avoid issues at that date. Phase 2 it will begin, the first submission date will be March 31st of 2019, and that is when states will report on modules 1 through 4 of the CSBG annual report using the online data collection system. So in that case, states will collect modules, the data needed for modules 2, 3, and 4 from CSBG eligible entities, and we'll be entering that into OLDC. So we'll be doing a substantial amount of work before that with regard to creating the online forms and testing and the systems for that. So again, just to highlight, the data submission for the fiscal year 16 CSBG report will be due April 7th, 2017.
Now we'll turn it over to Jackie Orr.
Lauren and Seth. Okay, so let me continue on with what Seth was saying. This is Jackie. Due again on April 7th, the annual report in OLDC. You'll be doing sections A through I, but then you'll also be completing the IS survey in the Access database. And in that IS survey, you'll be completing section B, which is the eligible entity list. And this is going to really be a cross-check with what you have submitted in Module 1 to the OLDC. And then, and if there's any changes in any of your eligible entity names, then we'll have accurate information when you go to enter the NPIs. So that's the reason for doing the eligible entity list for section B in the Access database. You'll be doing section D, the training and technical assistance survey, and also sections E, F, and G, which cover the expenditure, CSBG expenditures, the resources administered, and of course section G is the program participant characteristics. We'll be doing all of that in the IS Survey Access database along with the National Performance Indicators. All we're going to do is we're going to take a deeper dive into Module 1, the State Administration module. So we will be walking through each section of Module 1. So the first thing I just want to reiterate is that all information reported in Module 1 will be based on the federal fiscal year 2016. So it's different. That may be different for some of you. So you have to pay special attention to that. So the federal fiscal year runs from October 1st, 2015 and ends on September 30th, 2016. So all information reported in Module 1 will be based on that year. you'll see the different sections of Module 1. So you are well aware Module 1 is the State Administration Module only. So let's walk through the sections. Section A is the, could you go back? Thank you. Section A is the CSBG lead agency, authorized official, and point of contact information. We'll be covering that during this webinar. We'll start with Section B, which covers the statewide goals and accomplishments. Section 3 has the eligible entity listing that you can update. Section D will have you respond to the organizational standards for eligible entities. Section E is the state use of funds. Section F covers state training and technical assistance. Section G with state linkages and communication. Section 8 is on monitoring, corrective action, and fiscal controls. And then we end with Section I about ROMA. Great. So there are similar sections, A through D, in the CSBG IS, and we'll look at a slide in a minute, so we'll take a look at the crosswalk. Module 1 is completed by the state CSBG administrators. Allocation, as I just mentioned, is based on the federal fiscal year, and so you know that data is auto-populated from your 2016 state plan. Information on the state administration, includes information on the state administration of CSBG funding, the use of state administrative funds for discretionary funds for training and technical assistance and administrative funds, progress of the eligible entities on the organizational standards, and of course this part would be new, and then the state's progress in meeting accountability measures that can be related to the state monitoring, training, and technical assistance, as well as other areas. CASP and OCS, as I think Seth had just talked about a few minutes ago, have been working on making sure that OLDC is up and ready for folks. So we have been working with a group of 6 states that have been doing beta testing to test Module 1 and OLDC. So they've been really instrumental in going through and making sure that if there's any issues or any kinks or any technical problems, that OCS and OIS has been able to address those. So as Seth has also mentioned, that's a little bit different from what was in the action transmittal, but OLDC is expected to be available to all of you on March 2nd, and that is due in OLDC by April 7th. And again, he mentioned that this is an extension from the typical March 31st date, and this is the one-time submission extension. A crosswalk that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So this is a good overview of a comparison with Module 1 and what's in the CSBG IS survey. So we can see that Section A in Module 1 compares and connects with Section C in the IS survey. Section B on statewide goals and accomplishments is found in Section D, accomplishments and coordination of funds in the IS survey. Section C for eligible entities is Section B in the IS survey. You'll see that Section D, of course, related to the organizational standards for eligible entities, doesn't have a corresponding place in our current IS survey. E on state use of funds, and Section F, state training and technical assistance, is found in Section A and Section B of the IS survey. And then you'll see that Section G with state linkages and communication, Section A with monitoring, corrective action, and fiscal controls, as well as Section I, which covers ROMA. They are all new due in the State Administration Module 1, so they don't have a corresponding place with the CSBG IS survey.
So this is Kate, and move us to Section B, which has to do with statewide goals and accomplishments. Jackie just mentioned there's a lot of parallel between the State Administration Module 1 and the CSBG IS survey at this point in time because we're in transition. You will recall as we move forward where the parallels are going to exist are going to be between the state plan and the annual report. The intent is over time the states will be in their state plan goals telling us telling OCS what they plan to be doing, their intent is, and then the annual report actually saying what was accomplished, sort of the to be, and then what happened. So this is certainly reflective in Section B, and this is a section where states can explain the successes they're having in their state, include satisfaction of the eligible entities, which is I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the ACSI and how we're utilizing that and how that affects Section B. So all of you, I'm sure, are aware that in the fall of 2015, OCS used the ACSI methodology to conduct 2 ways to get feedback, one from the states, from the CSBG lead agencies, on the services provided by CSBG, as outlined in the federal accountability measures. Then the second survey that was conducted was of the eligible entities about the services provided by the state CSBG agencies, and those detailed in the state accountability measures. So if you will recall, the types of activities that were surveyed had to do with develop state CSBG plans, the distribution of funds, the use of discretionary funds, training and technical assistance, monitoring and corrective action, and communication. So us and the state directors received their individual state ACSI survey reports in February of last year. It detailed feed from the eligible entities in each of those activities, plus each state got its own ACSI score. And that's going to be carried over both in terms of your state plan and in terms of the annual report. So let's now look at kind of the calendar, which is what we're anticipating. Sometimes bureaucracies get in the way, but this is what we're hoping to do. So, if you look at this point at the, I guess it's the green, which would deal with the eligible entity surveys. So we are anticipating to conduct the eligible entity survey later this quarter or very early next quarter. And then usually the states would get their results usually within 6 to 8 weeks after the survey finishes, so that then you will be able to use, hopefully in your next state plan. But it will give you a sense of progress that you're making in each of the areas and in your customer satisfaction result. Next slide. So report on your annual report. For most of you, this is identical to what you reported in your state report and your state plan. If you just submit a state plan, this is where you're going to put in the information, which is why, to some extent, it's reported in both places. There's 3 pieces of data: the prior year target, your most recent ACSI score, and your future target. This is no prior year target because there was no prior year. This is the first year we did the survey. So that will be blank. Your ACSI score is the score that you received in February 2016. For some reason you don't have your report or your whatever, you can contact OCS or me and we can provide another copy for you. And then the third column has to do with your future target. What you target in terms of attaining or increasing your ACSI score. You should refer to IM 150, which gives you a sense and gives you some parameters for setting targets for the ACSI, because it's a little bit different than you might do in terms of setting other kinds of targets. So I've given you some examples. If you already got a score in the 80s, you're only going to expect to maybe add 1 more point. If you score that's in the 50s, you might be able to do 5 or 10 more points. We've kind of given you some guidance based on the ACSI use across the country and other government agencies. Next slide. So in terms of the ACSI and the annual report, kind of little, again, due April 7th, what we include is the state's most current fashion score, which is going to be what we got in February 2016. This is for you to talk about how you considered feedback from eligible entities and other sources. Obviously, good customer service methodology says that once you from your customers and decide you want to take some action, you then go back to your customers and work with them in terms of, are these the types of actions that will meet the needs that were expressed. There's also a place to talk about what actions you've taken as a result of that feedback. If your entities want more regular communication, what types of more regular communication have you initiated? And then I mentioned you put next year's target for the ACSI. Because the state CSBG plan may cover 2 fiscal years, these annual updates are related to the eligible entity satisfaction should be provided in the annual report. We'll make sure we have something for every state. It's covering both the annual report and the state plan. And then the final part of B4, B5, and B6 are your success stories. This has kind of been put in one place, and this is kind of a place for you to highlight state management accomplishments, the eligible entity management accomplishments, and innovative solutions highlights. You've done this in the past. We'll kind of put this all together so you have a good section B that gives you gives everybody a sense of what's been accomplished. These also I know included in section D, the IS, but during the transition year, we'll make sure these are covered in both places. As we move out of the transition year, you'll only be reporting these once. So that on section B, it should be a fun section to fill out.
Great, thank you, Kate. This is Katie. Section C is the CSBG eligible entity update portion of Module 1. This is where states will review and update any changes to their CSBG eligible entities. So this is in a screenshot that you will see when you log into OLDC. The first column lists the CSB eligible entities as you have them listed in your current state plan, or the state plan from FY16, I should say. We're asking that you review all the names to ensure that they're correct and accurate. This column identifies whether or not the entity is a public or private entity. The third column identifies what type of entity is it. Is it a local government agency, a community action agency, etc. The column identifies what geographical area is being served by that particular entity. So please view this column closely and update where necessary. If you have to make an update in this chart, you will go to the fifth column, C2A, and click yes or no. No, you don't have to make any updates and everything is correct and accurate. And yes, if you do have to make any updates. With yes, you will see additional box pop up, like as in the third column. And this is where we're asking for you to describe what changed about the CSBG eligible entity. As a reminder, we're also collecting this information in the current IS database, and as Jackie said, is to ensure a check against this system, and also if there are any changes, it will populate for your NPIs as you enter data into the Access database. Please note again that in the lower left-hand corner, this is on page 6 of the FRN for Module 1. So in the chart, we're again asking you to report any changes to the CSBG eligible entities. If there are changes, the specific type of information that we are looking for is what's in the name. What was the old name? What is the new name? What's in the county list? Was it just a typo that you noticed, or did an entity take on additional counties or lose certain counties, things like that? If there are new entities, please provide us with the DUNS number and address and any other information that you think would be important for us to have about this particular entity.
Katie, this is Monique from the Office of Community Services. I speak to Section D, where you'll be reporting on the organizational standards for eligible entities. Table D contains a few tables to report targets. Next slide. The first one would be Table D2. The table below, you'll provide the percentage of CSBG eligible entities that met all state-adopted organizational standards in the reporting period, which there will be federal fiscal year 2016. On the third row, see that you can put fiscal year, which this year will be 2016. The state CSBG plan target column. This number will pull from the state plan, question 6.6. Or if you recall, in federal fiscal year 2016, no states were required to report the CSBG plan target. So this year, in the report, the state target will be left blank. Should be the number of entities assessed. This should be simply the total number of entities within the state, but be able to edit this number. So if for any reason you did not assess all of your entities within the state, this number can change. The following column will be the number that met all 100% of state standards. And the last number is an auto calculation. We see the numbers, the percentage is a little skewed here, so we are fixing that. This is a old screenshot. But the calculation will be the percentage of the number that met 100% of state standards. And this part of this table, and it's better if we stay with it. And the second part of the table, you'll see that there's a column of number of entities assessed, and this column is the number of entities that met between 90 and 99%, 89%, and then 70 and 79%. The first column of number of entities assessed will auto-populate from the row of the first part of this table once you click Save. So our option is to click Save after you enter the number of entities assessed within the third row of the first part of the table. You enter the number of entities that met each range within these targets, and then save again, and the actual percentages will come up. Just to reiterate, the state CSBG plan target, which is column 2, will be blank for this first year of reporting, and the total numbers assessed in D2 will typically equal the total number of eligible entities within the state. And the second part of the table, the number of entities assessed, will populate from the third row in the first part of the table of D2. And throughout the years, we'll track the progress indicators, how over time the entities meeting different sets of standards. D2B speaks to organizational standards in the terms of technical and training assistance. The column, the second column, the number of entities assessed will also populate from the first table mentioned D2, so you will not have to complete the same number over and over again. And third column, you'll enter in the number of all standards in each category, and the actual percentage will auto-calculate once you click Save or Validate. Information about this can be found in the FRN on pages 8 and 9.
Thank you, Monique. Talk a little bit about Section E, which is the state, relates to the state use of CSBG funds. What we're looking for here is a snapshot of the actual allocations and obligations that took place during the time frame of the federal fiscal year. And we'll be asking throughout this section about the allocations and obligations to eligible entities, the allocations to state administrative and obligations in that category, and other state discretionary funds. And this section, we're looking for information, a snapshot of what actually allocated and obligated during the time frame of the fiscal year, and we'll be looking also at the amounts that carried over from the fiscal year and amount we'll be carrying over into the next fiscal year. So this is the question 2, which is the example of what relates to the allocations and obligations to the eligible entities. This is sometimes referred to as the 90% funds, and again, these are the funds that are distributed by a state-determined formula to the eligible entities. The left-hand column on planned, these is the amount. This is what was included in the state plan, and in some cases it would be a percentage. In some cases it would be an estimated dollar amount. In the column, we will have two for the allocations, which the amount that eligible entity would be entitled to in the time frame based on the state allocation formula. This is the obligations, which is the actual amount committed to those eligible entities during the fiscal year. So let's carry on with that, and we'll next slide kind of frame up that distinction. Allocations, again, based on the state formula, the state should enter the dollar amount that each eligible entity again should receive during the federal fiscal year based on the state formula. And again, at the time frame of the federal fiscal year. The obligations. Now, this is, again, what was actually committed to each eligible entity through contracts, grants, or subawards during the federal fiscal year. And, there may be times when there's a distinct, when those amounts do not walk. For example, there may be various reasons for that, but an entity may, for example, have been in the process of contract negotiation or had provided certain information to the state that was required in order to complete a contract activity. But we're basically looking for a snapshot of where we are in terms of the amount that that entity would have allocated during the time period of the federal fiscal year and what they've actually been obligated. We are the next slide. We're looking only here at allocations and obligations to each eligible entity during the fiscal year. We are not looking for a report by eligible entity of the actual expenditures, meaning the liquidation of funds that took place in each entity during that fiscal year. It's the amount that was committed and made available to the eligible entities. Okay, next slide. Is that there are categories of states that will have to approach this in different ways. There are states that operate under a state fiscal year from July 1st to June 1st. There are states that operate essentially congruent with the federal fiscal year, October 1st to September 30th, and states that operate base fiscal year that is tied to the calendar year, so January 1st to December 31st. So this chart gives a picture that, the way to rate this is all of these we have quarterly disbursements of funds, and states should be able to track on a quarterly basis the obligations that took place, what would have been allocated to the entities during that time, and the obligations that took place during that time. So those states that report that have a fiscal year from July 1st to June 1st, this reporting period encompasses the second, third, and fourth quarters of their fiscal year and the first quarter of the next fiscal year. For states that report fiscal year that is consistent with the federal fiscal year, again, that would be first, second, third, and fourth quarters of their fiscal year. And for states that operate congruent with more of the calendar year and fiscal year, they'd be reporting on the fourth quarter of the federal the prior fiscal year, the first and third quarters of the next fiscal year. And again, what we're looking for here is one time a snapshot of what was actually allocated to these various categories and actually obligated and made available in just the time frame. When the E9 is a roll-up, so it outlines it's been the actual obligations, what was actually obligated to the able entities during that fiscal time frame, the amount that was allocated, obligated according to state administrative costs, the amount that was obligated for other remainder or discretionary funds. Those are state funds that are available. And these funds will total, I believe they auto calculate in the table. And A and B, what we're looking for here is the total amount that was reported in this section, how much of that was carryover from the prior fiscal year, and E and B is going to be carrying over from this fiscal year into the next fiscal year. So this is again a picture of, ultimately we get a picture of how much funding was actually obligated during that the time frame of the fiscal year, how much will be carrying over into the next.
In fiscal year, hi, it's Monique again. In fiscal 2016, it was the first year states completed a state plan in OLDC. There were 13 states who were in their second year already. OS gave these 13 states the option to complete the plan in full or solely complete specified sections and items. One state chose to complete a new plan, 5 states chose to complete the state in full, and the 7 states that only completed the specified sections and items. While Module 1, we noted that some of the questions which auto-populate were not required to be completed. Due to this, we want to give further instructions to those affected states. Next. At the end of the table, within Section E, there were 4 questions that auto-populate from the CSBG State Plan. E2, Table E4, Item E5, and Table E6. The states affected by this are Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, Utah, Virginia, and Washington State. Next slide. Item E2, the first 3 columns will auto-populate from CSP 7.2, CSP standing for CSBG State Plan. CSBG eligible entity was completed by all states as 5.1 was required to be completed, and the CSBG eligible entities hold that. The funding amount was not required, and Connecticut, Massachusetts, Utah, Virginia, and Washington chose not to complete the plan amount. These 2 fields under plan, funding amount, and funding dollar or percent only, which means you will not be able to update them, but can just complete the actual allocations and obligations as specified just before this. Next slide. Table E4, start here from CSBG State Plan 7.6. Maryland, Massachusetts, Utah, Virginia, and Washington State not enter a target, which means the first 2 columns can be left blank as a percentage conversion, and you just complete the actual amount obligated under the last column and dollars. 5 auto-populates from CSP 7.7. Again, Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, Utah, Virginia, and Washington State are affected by this. Again, you would just complete the actual number of staff positions funded within the last column. These auto-populates from CSP 7.8. Connecticut and Washington State did not complete this question within the CSP. So you would just complete the actual number of staff positions funded.
So, and just highlight on that, that's sort of a one-time artifact from the fact that, the state, some of those states had 2-year plans, and we're on the second year of a 2-year plan, so some of those responses were optional, and the decision was that we would not try to auto-populate those in the system.
And Dakota was one of the 7 states, but you were, they actually completed the answers for all of these questions. You're not affected by Section E.
SAS covers state training and technical assistance. In Model 1, this is the chart that you will see for reporting the state training and technical assistance that you identified in your FY16 state plan. This is where you can identify what the actual training dates were. All the date options in OLDC will be date pickers, so to make it easy on you. If training was not conducted, you can identify that here, and we ask that you provide us a brief description as to what happened that the planned training was not conducted. We are asking for a brief description of trainings that were conducted. In the example, you can see that the state had planned a ROMA training. It happened in April, and they identified that it was a week-long trainer. Next slide. In F1, we're asking that you enter only training and technical assistance that was provided or paid for by the state. We do understand that there is a lot of additional training and technical assistance that occurs in each state, but in this particular report and section, we're asking only for that training and technical assistance that was provided or paid for. Please include all discretionary funded training. And next slide. So an example of what not to include would be a training provided by a state association that was funded through the RPIC fund. What I do want you to include is a conference that was organized by a state association supported through state discretionary funds. Next slide. F2, asking states to identify to which entities they provide training and technical assistance funds. So this is primarily discretionary funds. The funds that went to these entities, the training can be reported in section F1. Next slide. Technical assistance that was contracted may be reported in this table, and again, enter only the types of entities with whom the state contracted.
To section G, state linkages and communication. I want to point first to the results of the ACSI report from the survey of eligible entities, because this is a section where we can see some progress in this particular area. You'll recall that linkages and communication was one of the big areas that we surveyed. It was also the area that, while it didn't get the lowest score by any means, it was somewhat lower scored, but it was the highest impact area, which means that linkages and communication is something very important to the eligible entities, and the more improvement we can make in this area, the more we can achieve a higher customer satisfaction. In the three areas you will see we combine linkages and communication in the survey, but linkages really is covered by the first three awareness of the efforts, efficiency of linkages, and effectiveness of partnerships. And you will see that those scores were 57, 56, and 56, the lowest scores. Similarly, from the eligible entities, the communication is pretty some areas that could be improved, but the linkages is really where the eligible entities thought there needed to be more focus. This is the place where the states that are focusing on this could talk about what it is they're doing. So next slide. There's in the annual report examples of what might be doing at the state in terms of enhancing your linkages and the coordination at your state level. This might be participating in boards or task forces or works that promote CSBG, working closely with LIHEAP or weatherization, participate in working groups that make for eligible entities in terms of some things like homelessness and housing, some of those initiatives. We do an example on the WIOA, just sort of an example of the type of thing, and we aren't expecting tones of explanation, but there'd be some specific things that you might do next slide, for instance, on WIOA, the kind of joint that you might make that would provide linkages that eligible entities are looking for. So this is the place to focus on in terms of something that we know is important to the network. Just want that for you.
Another section that's affected by auto-population. There are 5 questions which auto-populate from the model state plan. They are all narrative, suggesting that the affected states based on actual implementation, and you can refer to your original 2-year plan that you submitted as needed. Massachusetts, South Dakota, Utah, Virginia, and Washington State are affected by this. However, Connecticut, Maryland, and Massachusetts all completed question 9.10 within the CSBG State Plan, so they will have something to pull from within the annual report. Section H speaks to the monitoring, corrective action, and fiscal controls. Table .1, replica of the table in the CSBG State Plan, and you gave your plan for the monitoring for fiscal year 2016 and or 2017 if you're doing a 2-year plan. Chapter 3 will pull over from the state plan. You will update column 3, which is the planned site visit date, where it was just a quarter. However, we are requesting that you provide an actual site visit date. Date pickers, so usually just be able to pick the date from a calendar. It's a 1-day monitoring or review of any sort. You just start and the end date be the same date. And that should never fall before the start date. The purpose, you would provide what type of visit, not a follow-up planned or not, and if it wasn't planned, the reason why you did decide to go there. And have not conducted, this will be a yes or no. And if you say that it was not conducted, we would also want you to provide the reason it was not conducted within a brief description. All types of monitoring should be included in desk or on site.
Hi, this is Jackie again. And this is section I believe this is the last section of Module 1, and this speaks to ROMA. And section gives the opportunity for states to report on your ROMA implementation, your report of the eligible entities, their ROMA activities, your state review of the data, and also the opportunity to report on continuous improvement. So let's take a look at a couple of the questions in this section. So here we're looking at 1A and 1B, and really speaks to the state will be able to provide information on any changes in procedures or to data collection systems that have been initiated or completing during the reporting period. So the states can describe how you worked on updating data collection systems, if you implemented any new processes to review outcome data, or as you review community needs assessments or community action plans of your eligible entities. And you also have the opportunity to describe any changes in these processes. If we take I-3 and I-4, this speaks to the state review and feedback of data. So I-3 is states describing the procedures and activities that the state used to review the ROMA data. So we have listed, as you can see on your screen, some possible activities that the state could use. So you can use the available diagnostic tools that are in the CSBG IS database to identify targeting accuracy as well as any fluctuations. You can look at comparing outcome data to community action plans and or community needs assessments of the eligible entities, and comparing agency documents such as strategic plans to the CSBG IS data. Now look at the next slide. The next slide is I-4, and it really speaks to the feedback of the state. So the state provides feedback within 60 calendar days of submitting the state's annual report to the eligible entity. And as you can see, it talks about providing written feedback on what you discovered from your review. So there's an example here that we've given to you. So we have the state made a recommendation that the entity consider targeting more individuals for a particular outcome because the entity regularly exceeded their goals. So that's an example of something that could be provided by the state to the eligible entity after reviewing the data that you received from the eligible entity. And then I-5 really speaks to the continuous improvement. So the state will provide 2 or 3 examples of changes made by the eligible entities to improve service delivery, enhance impact for individuals or families and or communities. And so this is the way that we've given you some examples. You can identify the following that occurred at an eligible entity. So you noted that the entity implemented a single application for individuals and families being served. The entity organized and operated all of its program services and activities towards accomplishing the results that they identified in their community action plan. The entity also was able to cross-train staff to serve all participants across programs. So again, these are examples of what you've been able to identify and point out examples of changes that the eligible entities made to improve their service delivery systems. And then in section I, this is for states for whom this section will not auto-populate. And as you can see, the effective states are Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, Utah, Virginia, and Washington State. So in this case, that chart that you see at the screen, these states would then select the best option because those options will not already be checked because there will be no pre-populated information in there.
Okay.
Welcome.
We've gotten some questions through the chat. Some we've answered as we've gone through the slides, and others we want to make sure we go back to. So as we're going back to some of the questions that have already been asked, please think of others that you may have and enter them in the Q&A box, or you could raise your hand to ask. First, we're going to go back to regarding the ACSI. ACSI. Karen, just a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question was, when it said as the ACSI goal for next year, are you saying the goal number we anticipate we will enter in the 2018 state plan as well?
Okay. Let me try to be more clear on this. I understand why it might be confusing. So those of you that put a state plan September of 2016 for fiscal year 2017, you put in your ACSI score based on the report that you got in February of 2016. You added a target for what to accomplish in 2017, which is what you'd be reporting next year. Those that did not submit a state plan, this would be a new task. So that you would be using the February 2016 report to include in your annual report what is the actual score, and then what would be your target for 2017. You're running a few months behind because you didn't submit the state plan. So it depends on whether you submitted the state plan. If you submitted a state plan last September, you will be using the same numbers that you used then. If you didn't, you'll be putting new numbers because you didn't submit one. Now, in terms of your state plan 14, by then, you should have a new ACSI score because we will have run the survey again. You'll get a new ACSI score. And based on that, you can set a new target. So if you're submitting a state plan in September of this year, you'll be doing new numbers. That aren't submitting a state plan this year, you won't do that again until the annual report next year.
Okay. We had another question about Section E, that state use of funds. The question was, since not all entities choose to carry over funds, our allocations and obligations won't match our state formula. Is that acceptable?
So I think we are, just want to first clarify that in one and in Section E, we're asking about the state's allocation and obligation to the eligible entities, not about the eligible entities' expenditures. We're not looking at whether the entity carried funds over. We are looking at two things. The allocation is such that entity should match the state formula for the time period that's covered. So, for example, if an entity was allocated based on the state formula, would have had $100,000 available to them during that time frame, that would be the amount. And it should correspond with the state formula. With regard to the obligations, we're not looking at the entity's expenditures. We're looking at how much the state made available for the entity to, through contracts or formal funding agreements for the same time period. That's the obligation. The state has obligated the funds formally and made them available for the entity to expend. So the issue of, the issue of the entity's expenditures and carryover is, it's not the question that we're asking. We're really tracking at this phase the state having what was the amount that the entity would have been entitled to under the state's formula, and what was the amount during that same time period that was made available to the entity for expend and drawdowns. In some cases, it's going to be exactly the same amount. Again, if contracts had been available during that time frame in relatively quick succession, contractual mechanism make funds available continuously and without interruption. The only for example, there may be an issue where an entity funds were not made available to an eligible entity to contract because there was misdocumentation or other kinds of delays, and that might show up in that table for a particular eligible entity. But keeping in mind that what we're talking about is the state's allowance, what would the formula, the allocation is essentially synonymous. How much would that entity be entitled to that time period according to the state's formula? And the obligation is how much was actually made available, committed through contracts or funding awards to eligible entities. So that's what we're trying to get a picture of here. There, at a later stage in modules 2, 3, and 4, we're going to be in module 2. At a later, we'll be asking for some information about how the eligible entities expended the funds, but not asking for that in this module at this phase.
Okay, Beth. Now we'll move to a question on Section F, State Training and Technical Assistance. It looks like a clarifying question asking if they would also report NTA if it was provided by state admin funds.
So when we framed up typically think of this as we're really looking for on any training and technical assistance that were funded through the state's what we could refer to as discretionary funds. Typically, we tend to think of administrative funds not being used for training and technical assistance so much as for the state's costs that are associated with conducting the program, supporting their, again, administrative expenses, and the other remainder discretionary funds would be allocated and dedicated to training and technical assistance projects and the like. Bottom line here is if it's funded by the state through its share of the state CSBG funding, that would be what we're for. The distinction we're making here is that if there was an activity that was supported, it was funded through the RPIC, which is a federal grant directly to the that goes directly to the state association or goes through the state association consortia. That we're not asking you to report on that. We're asking for those things that were supported by the state CSBG funding, and we don't. We would typically think of administrative the costs of conducting and administering the grants. And we typically refer to the remainder or discretionary, those funds being your funds that were not to exceed 10% of the total grant. But the point is you should discuss any of the training and technical assistance activities, contract support activities that were supported through the state funds as opposed to what we funded through the RPIC.
The questions are slowing down a little bit. If anyone has any last questions, please enter them into the Q&A. We'll look to see if there's some that we may have missed. Wait to see if any last questions come through. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the tools and resources that are currently available and then those that will be posted soon or coming soon. We do have a Word document available for Module 1 so that while you're waiting for it to go live in OLDC, you can your answers and responses. So we have a high-level crosswalk that you saw a snapshot of today during the webinar that's available on the NASCSP website, as well as a more detailed annotated version that we really recommend you take a look at. It goes data piece by data piece and ties it back to the S. And soon we'll have a handy Module 1 one-pager with the information that you'll need to know for your submission this year. And you're very close to the instructions manual that will be available to you as you're entering responses into OLDC. It looks like many of you have already registered. This webinar that will be the coming Monday, February 27th, held 3 to 4:30 p.m. This webinar really focus on entering responses into OLDC. So we'll have opportunity to see a demo from a CS in terms of how you would actually enter your information. Looks like we've got a couple questions just to clarify that the due date for both the IS and Module 1 is April 7th. We are looking at a March 2nd launch date of OLDC. We will keep you updated as any additional information is available. And hopefully we will see many of you on the webinar on Monday.
Well, again, thank you for everyone who's participated in this webinar. We'll be, as you've heard, we'll be doing a more of a technical how-to webinar related to the actual mechanics of getting into OLDC and what it'll look like, kind of when you enter, what an auto population kind of examples will look like. And, you know, we will then be made, as we've talked at the beginning of this process, we'll be anticipating a March 2nd live date for OLDC, and then that month, during the month of as we go forward, we'll look forward to, you know, if we hear questions or we see things that are recurring or regular questions, we'll be tracking that and doing our best to provide, you know, ongoing updates or information as we go. And of course, we'll also be looking forward to those of you who are going to be at the NASCSP conference to talking about it, both in terms of whether your experience with the system and where we can continue to make improvements as we go forward. But we appreciate your time, and again, we're looking forward to going live on this important new phase of our work in the performance management system.
Okay. One last reminder, the due date for all data submission for Module 1 and EIS is April 7th. So we'll stop on that note, and thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you on Monday.